Most Holy Lord and Father, we know, and from the chronicles and books of the ancients, we find that among other famous nations, our own, the Scots, has been graced with widespread renown. They journeyed from Greater Scythia by the way of the Tyrrhenian Sea and the Pillars of Hercules, and dwelt for a long course of time in Spain, among the most savage tribes, but nowhere they could be subdued by any race, however barbarous. Thence they came, 1,200 years after the people of Israel crossed the Red Sea, to their home in the West, where they still live today. They first drove out the Picts. They utterly destroyed, and even though very often assailed by the Norwegians, the Danes, and the English, they took possession of that home with many victories and untold efforts. And as the historians of old time bear witness, they have held it free of all bondage ever since. In their kingdom have reigned 113 kings of their own royal stock, the line, unbroken by a single foreigner. The high qualities and deserts of these people were that they were not otherwise manifest to gain glory enough from this, that the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, our Lord Jesus Christ, after his passion and resurrection, called them, even though settled in the outermost parts of the earth, almost the first of his holy faith. Nor would he have them confirmed in that faith by merely anyone, but by the first of his apostles, by calling, although third in rank, the most gentle St. Andrew, the blessed Peter's brother, and desired him to keep them under his protection as their patron forever. The most holy fathers, your predecessors, gave careful heed to these. Came under their protection and indeed did live in freedom and peace up to the time when that mighty prince, the king of the English, Edward, the father of the one who reigns today, when our kingdom had no head, and our people harbored no malice or treachery, and were then unused to wars or invasions, came in the guise of a friend or an ally to harass them as an enemy. The deeds of cruelty, massacre, violence, pillage, arson, imprisoning prelates, burning down monasteries, robbing and killing monks and nuns, and yet other outrages without number which he committed against our people, sparing neither age nor sex, religion nor rank. No one could describe nor fully imagine, unless he had seen them with his own eyes. But from these countless evils we have been set free by the help of him who, though he afflicts, yet heals and restores, by our most tireless Prince, King and Lord, the Lord Robert. He, that his people and his heritage might be delivered out of the hands of our enemies, met toil and fatigue, hunger and peril, like another Maccabeus or Joshua, and bore them cheerfully. Him who divine providence, his right of succession, according to our laws and customs, which we shall maintain unto the death, and the due consent and assent of us all, have made our Prince and King. To him, as to the man by whom salvation has been wrought unto our people, we are bound, both by law and by his merits, that our freedom may still be maintained, and by him, come what may, we mean to stand. Yet if he should give up what he has begun and agree to make us or our kingdom subject to the English, or to the King of England, we should exert ourselves at once to drive him out as our enemy and a subverter of his own rights and ours, and make some other man who was well able to defend us our king. For as long as but 100 of us remain alive, never will we, on any conditions, be brought under English rule. It is, in truth, not for glory, nor riches, nor honors that we are fighting, but for freedom, for that alone, which no honest man gives up, but with life itself. Therefore, it is, Reverend Father and Lord, that we beseech your holiness with our most earnest prayers and suppliant hearts, inasmuch as you will in your sincerity and goodness consider all of this, that since with him who's vice-regent on earth, may it please you to admonish and exhort the King of England, who ought to be satisfied with what belongs to him, since England used once to be enough for 7 kings or more, to leave us poor Scots in peace who live in this poor little Scotland, beyond which there is no dwelling place, and covet nothing but our own. We are sincerely willing to do anything for him, having regard to our condition, that we can to win peace for ourselves. This truly concerns you, Holy Father, since you see the savagery of the heathen raging against the Christians, as the sins of the Christians have indeed deserved, and the frontiers of Christendom being pressed inward every day, and how much it will tarnish your holiness's memory, if which, God forbid, the church suffers eclipse or scandal in any branch of it during your time. You must perceive the Christian princes who for false reasons pretend that they cannot go to help of the Holy Land because of wars they have on hand with their neighbors. The real reason that prevents them is that making war on their smaller neighbors, they find quicker profit and weaker resistance. But how cheerfully our Lord, the King, and we would too go there if the King of the English would leave us in peace. He from whom nothing is hidden well knows, and we profess and declare it to you as the Vicar of Christ and to all Christendom. But if your holiness puts too much faith in the tales the English tell, and will not give sincere belief to all of this, nor refrain from favoring them to our prejudice, then the slaughter of bodies and the perdition of souls and all the other misfortunes that will follow, inflicted by them on us and by us on them, will, we believe, be surely laid by the Most High. To conclude, we are and shall ever be, as far as duty calls us, ready to do your will in all things as obedient sons to you, his vicar, and to him as the supreme king and judge. We commit the maintenance of our cause, casting our cares upon him and firmly trusting that he will inspire us with courage and bring our enemies to naught. May the Most High preserve you to his holy church in holiness and health, and grant you length of days, given at the monastery of Arbroath in Scotland on the 6th day of the month of April in the year of grace 1320, in the 15th year of the reign of our King aforesaid.
my voice blowing on the breeze. Know your faith, know your history. As I am now, you one day will be. Face your past, then face your destiny. Now you may live a different place, brought up and lived a different way. But if you have our blood in your veins, then you will know us. Know home, know who you are. Now here you are, standing next to me. Come take my hand and walk with me. If you could feel the peace in our hills and glens, you would know it's where it all began. And you would know who I really am.
And the result of a no vote. Here's what the future will actually look like in the result of a no vote. Ahead of the referendum, the unionist parties will start talking about enhanced devolution. Strange, considering that David Cameron fought to remove Devo Max from the ballot paper. This will be then amplified by the media as a genuine enhanced devolution settlement.
Vote yes or for Devo Max.
And it will be on the basis of taxation.
Now, plans to give more powers to the Scottish Parliament, including greater control of income tax.
Let's allow Scotland to raise more in taxation. That's the way ahead. That's the next step for devolution.
The Parliament will now be more accountable and responsible for the effects of its decisions and the resulting benefits or costs.
Now, because there's been this enhanced devolution, that will then allow the right-wingers in Westminster to say
English votes for English laws requires a decisive answer.
So that will be redressed, therefore reducing the presence and the power of Scottish MPs at Westminster.
Members of Parliament will be banned from participating based on nationality and geographic location of constituency.
Meanwhile, they'll scrap the Barnett formula. So Scotland becomes less powerful at Westminster, has less money to spend because of the reduction in the block grant, but has more powers to increase taxation.
Implement these powers
to at least ameliorate the effects of austerity from Westminster.
She's coming for your paycheck.
What do? They either raise taxes or they cut public services, making them extremely unpopular. So having lost the referendum, having either raised taxes or cut public services, therefore proved in the media that they're the same as Westminster, they become untenable as a vote. So Labour sets Scotland up to fail and then occupy the ruins. That's the future. It's simply another way to keep Scotland subjugated. That's what the union is. It's not partnership, it's a subjugation. Cultural, political, economic.
It's great to see so many folk here today. Have you brought your shovels? We've got a ditch to dig for Boris Johnson. And now I've been asked a special message that I've got to pass on. First of all, I've got to say hello to Gillian. Hi! And my friends in English Scots for Yes have said they want to record the crowd shouting, because our problem is not with England, it's not with the English, our problem is with the Westminster government. So they want to record this crowd shouting, "We love the English." You ready? 1, 2, 3. We love the English. Thank you. So we're here today to say that we want Scottish independence. Now, a lot of people have different ideas about the best way to get there, about different strategies for arriving at an independence referendum. But all those routes, all those different strategies, first must cross the bridge of the general election that is to come. Next month, on the 12th of December, there's going to be a general election. And it is vital that Scotland sends back as many pro-independence MPs as possible at that election. We need to pandify the Tories and Labour as well while we're at it. And what we need to do is to make sure that we have as many pro-independence MPs as possible at this next election, because the message will be from Westminster, if we don't do that, that Scotland doesn't want independence. It won't be if we don't get out there and vote, if we don't put our differences behind us and make sure that we all campaign for the SNP to get as many MPs as possible. The message won't be that Scotland we're disagreeing about Nicola's strategy for getting an independence referendum. It won't be about, Scotland wants to send a message on climate change. It will be Scotland doesn't want an independence referendum, because that's the way the media in this country works. We're here because we all believe in Scottish independence. And we didn't learn about Scottish independence through the traditional media in this country. We learned about Scottish independence because someone that we know and someone that we love told us about Scottish independence. And that's how we made this campaign for independence go from 28 or 29% as it was in 2012, and we achieved 45% in the referendum of 2014. And now the opinion polls are sitting on half and half, and we're there already almost. We don't have much further to go. And we've already proven that we can do it, that we can get that message out by talking to people, explaining the cause of independence, speaking one-to-one, and converting people to the cause of independence. Now, if we get the people that have already come over to our cause because of Brexit, and we can get back on board all those people that voted yes in 2014, and maybe some of them have slipped away, we've already got a nailed-on majority for Scottish independence. And that is why the anti-independence parties in this country and that wee gaggle of scared people up the back are so terrified. Because they know that Scotland will have its say. And when Scotland does have its say, it's going to say Scotland wants to rejoin the family of the international family of independent nations. That this beautiful, wet country of ours has decided that it's going to make its own way in the world, forming alliances and friendships with other countries from a position of equality. And that we refuse to get back into the shortbread tin that Westminster has put us in. I'm here today because somebody I know and love converted me to the cause of Scottish independence. It wasn't because of anything I read in a newspaper. It wasn't because of anything that I saw on the television. It was because somebody that I know and love explained to me why it was so important that Scotland becomes independent. It was my Uncle Shug. My Uncle Shug looked after us when we were wee babies. Him and my Auntie Jane. This is a man who's changed my nappy, which admittedly was just last week, which is a bit of an embarrassment. But he told me, and he always nipped my ear about Scottish independence and about why this country of ours can only achieve its full potential if it takes its decisions into its own hands. Because it's what your mammy and your granny always told you. If you want something done, do it yourself. And I've spoken to thousands of people across this country that are involved in this independence movement. And not one of them wants independence because they hate the English or anyone else. Not one of them wants independence because they think Scotland is better than anywhere else, or Scottish people are better than anywhere else. Every single one of them wants Scottish independence because they know that there is so much that is wrong with this country and we need to fix it. And the only way that we're going to fix it is when we take those decisions back into our own hands. And we will do that. I am so confident that Scotland is going to vote yes to independence in the not too distant future. So, just before I go, I would like to introduce you to the person who, for me, is the most important person in this entire independence campaign. The person that converted me to the cause of independence. Give a big cheer to my Uncle Shug. Thank you for listening. Ginger, come on.
I was only 16 when I met Young Scots for Independence back in Catalonia. Since that moment, I fell in love. I fell in love with Scotland I fell in love with your movement, and I fell in love with you, the Scottish people. I started dreaming about living in this country, but I come from a very working class family back home, and that dream felt impossible. Slowly, my parents realized that we couldn't afford uni in Catalonia. And then I found out in Scotland, education is not a privilege, it's a basic need. I still can remember the tears in my eyes, realizing that my dream was closer and closer to be here today. As soon as I was 18, I grabbed the little savings that I had and I decided to pursue my dreams. It wasn't easy. I worked very, very late nights to be able to pay rent, and I still struggled. As the time passed by, I saw my dream coming closer and closer. I got accepted in the college, not any college, but the best college of journalism here in the great city of Glasgow. Not that I'm biased. The road hasn't been easy. Through this day, I lost my dad halfway through my dream. And it's been hard. In those times, you really realize if that sacrifice was worth or not. But then I remember how proud my dad was of me and how much I love this country and how could I have made a mistake. Scotland is my home. This is my place. I'm proud to say today, after Nicola's speech, I'll be graduating from an HND in journalism. And I'm proud to be one of the many immigrants that study and work to create a better Scotland. And it's really, really hard to understand how everything I've worked so hard for can vanish in an instant. Life took away my dad in a second. But Brexit can take away my future, and I can't help that happening. I won't let that happen. It's scary how someone from behind a fancy desk can decide whether I'm worth to stay in this country or not. They don't understand how I feel about Scotland. I love Scotland. I am Scottish. Scotland doesn't want Brexit. We deserve better than this mess. I'm honestly so tired of talking about Brexit. It's more annoying than my ex-boyfriend, and I didn't thought that was possible. But you know what's more frustrating? Westminster. Every time they ignore us, every time one of our SNP MPs stand up to talk, they go and leave. And they keep asking why we want to leave. What a bunch of dafties. You know, we maybe laughed too hard when Donald Trump was elected, because now we've got the British version running the country, and I don't know who's worst. Boris, let me give you a message. You might take me out of Scotland, but you won't take Scotland out of me. In only 2 years, 2 years that I've lived in this country, I've fallen in love with the language. I love still game. I try to drink like a Scotch, but sometimes I fail. And people come up to me and say, "Oi, you're ginger, pale, and chubby. You're Scottish until you open your mouth." I mean, I don't like the chubby part. I don't like the pale part either. But when somebody says I'm Scottish, fills up my heart with so much pride I can't even explain. I even love the national football team, and that's some hard work. You might have heard the other day Jeremy Corbyn was here in Scotland. He went to Motherwell, and he got the cheek to start slagging off the SNP's work. Jeremy, what have you done? Because the real opposition in Westminster is not Labour, it's Ian Blackford and the SNP MPs. When Mr. Corbyn wakes up from his nap and starts doing his job, slag whoever you want. Until then, zip it. The other day, the headlines were about how Labour and Tories joined forces with the Lib Dems to try and stop the SNP. They need three of the biggest parties in the UK to stop the We Scottish Party. We might be doing something right. Dear friends, everyone here is dreaming about independence. While we are offering new beginnings and a whole new chapter, our opposition is offering nothing more than the mess we're already in. Here, in the SNP, we want everyone to be part of this whole new future. Come write this story with us. While we're writing our new country, this includes our transgender Scots, our new Scots, and everyone who wants to be part of with us. Doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, and what you are, Scotland is your home. And yes, Piers Morgan, we welcome penguins as well. We don't welcome you. Sometimes we might lose faith, but remember, as somebody quite smart said, hope over fear. Don't be afraid. Tell Westminster Tories that Scotland's no longer their slaves. Independence is around the corner, and this time it's our time. Don't forget to vote SNP on the 12th of December to send a clear message to Westminster. Boris Johnson, hold your wish and let Scotland speak, because Scotland is saying goodbye. Sor Alba, en visca Catalunya!
We're back. We're back stronger than we were on that 1st of October 2017.
When I fight for independence, I do so not because I'm a nationalist, I do so quite the reverse, because I am an internationalist. That is why I want independence.
There's a great strength to the distributed movement that we represent. Let's get tough, but let's get very, very organised across the whole of the movement to move forward.
You're in the city of the Enlightenment. You're in the Athens of the North. You're in the country that invented the Industrial Revolution. The steam hammer, the train, the television, the telephone, penicillin, Dolly the sheep, tar macadam, waterproof jackets, sectarianism. Scotland invented everything. And I'll tell you something I've just seen, and I would not have believed this had I not seen it with my own brown eyes. This movement, this independence movement, this civic nationalist movement has brought together folk that would never have shared a space together. In all my life, being a boy from Glasgow, I've never seen the Celtic and the Rangers symbols on the same banner. Celtic supporters, Rangers supporters, united for Scottish independence. If they can do it, fuck it, we can do it! Sorry about that. It's got a wee bit emotional there when I thought we might be independent. Oh, and if you meet any brown Scots that are again independence, just remind them, it wasn't so bad for India, was it? If you meet any Portuguese Scots, I don't know what to say to them. So we've now got a wee video from the National Yes Registry. This is very important. Oh fuck, this is even more important. Right, hush now. Now there's a wee 14-year-old boy called Billy Kerr, who's gone missing. He needs to be found. So if you can go backstage and ask for his dad. Aye. So if you Billy, don't be a hero, Billy. Come backstage. You're only 14, son. Get yourself. Just ask for your dad. Ask for anyone's dad, because in many ways we're all your dad, but not like that. So you ready for a bit of video action? This is very important. Watch this, listen to this, and do something about this. Go on yourselves, boys. As a 5-year-old boy in Crieff who dreams one day of having a family that will live in an independent Scotland. Shout for him while he waits to get old enough to get on the bus to come here at some point in the future.
We have a birthday shout out. Hang on a wee second, I took a picture of it.
So William Wallace's cousin, hey! Khalil, he's from the Moorish end of the family folk don't talk about.
It's Joanne Burrow's birthday!
Joanne Burrow's, happy birthday, Joanne. And in independent Scotland, it will still be your birthday.
Yeah.
Things like that won't change. We'll just be more progressive. We'll make sure that those with the greatest need have that realised, and those with the ability to deliver more to the state will have that realised. We'll live in a more egalitarian. But it'll still be your birthday, Joanne, so that won't change. So don't worry when the haters say, oh, all your birthdays will disappear,
right,
and everyone will become left-handed.
Shut up now.
And for Falkirk.
Honest to God, I can get this shite in the house. So I need a man just talking dead loud at the top of me. This is why we never get married.
I always wanted a civil partnership. I don't believe in marriage. I believe it's patriarchal and it subjugates women.
That's why I'm going to put my toe up the crack of your ninky now. How we doing, people? Let me hear all the strong women in the park. That's what we need. Let me hear all the men that aren't frightened of strong women in the park. See? What are you doing? This is the right time to do a crossword, Hardy.
No, it's 3 down, and it's...
Yeah, that's never happened to you. So...
It all happens to all men. It's stress-related. It's nothing to do with you, Janie. You're very attractive.
I am. I'm gorgeous.
Talking about hugely powerful women.
Yeah.
Who
Did you
have-
like how I did a segue to that?
Well, I just think, for those of you that watch the news, I'm awfully proud of the representatives sent down the road to... I'm reminded of when Mahatma Gandhi came to England in the 1930s, King George said to him, Mr. Gandhi, what do you think of Western civilization? And Mr. Gandhi said, I think it would be a good idea. And when I watch our representatives down the road, I kind of think civilization would be good for them in Westminster. No woman, perhaps with the exception of our leader, has stood with her head and shoulders above the parapet and been prepared.
Can I say her name?
Say her name. When no one is around you, say, baby, I love you. We've been playing games.
Let's all say together, the one and only Joanna Cherry!
Yay!
For such a lovely reception. I'm really incredibly proud to be asked to speak to you here today. It's amazing to see such a huge crowd of independence supporters in the middle of Scotland's capital city. And I want to thank each and every one of you for coming on this march today, because your confidence that independence is coming is not just heartwarming, it's also inspirational. And I know that as well as marching in joyful celebration today, you people who are marching are also the people who chap the doors and have the conversations with your neighbours and your family and your workmates and friends, the conversations that are convincing more and more of our fellow Scots to see how our future together is better as an independent nation. So I know that as well as marching here today, you are the people who fundraise for the Yes movement. And I know you are the people who do the groundwork for the Scottish National Party and the other pro-independence parties. And I know that you are the people who will make independence happen. So you should all be very proud of that, and don't let anyone ever say otherwise to you. In the midst of this toxic mess that Britain's in at the moment with Brexit, it's really wonderful to see such a positive outpouring of self-belief. And it's very important that we never let the positivity that started during the Indy Ref in 2014, it's very important we never let that descend into the sort of acrimony that we see at the heart of British politics at the moment. And it's very important that we understand and know that abusing and threatening those with whom we disagree is not the way to go. And I know that you know that already. And I know, because you are part of the movement, I know that you know the way to win independence is by calm, rational argument. But equally, days like today, when those of you who are the foot soldiers of our movement get together, are really important as well. And I want to say something about the independent Scotland that we aspire to create, because I think it's very important to say that it's going to be a very, very different place from Brexit Britain. And it's going to be an inclusive society and an egalitarian society where diversity is celebrated and immigrants are welcomed as new Scots. And it's going to be a fairer society where our pensioners get decent pensions that they've worked for all their lives. And it's going to be a fairer society where the burden of taxation falls on those best able to pay it. And it's also going to be a country that will lead the world in the fight for climate justice and the campaign for nuclear disarmament. But most of all, our independence independent Scotland will be at the heart of Europe, sitting at the top table. And we will not be like nationalists from England who want to be cantankerous on the sidelines, wishing for the British Empire to return, because that'll never happen. Now, the message that the unionist parties want to give us is a negative message, and they want to say to people in Scotland, you can't do this and you can't do that. And of course, last week a Liberal Democrat Member of Parliament actually said to his constituents that he would rather they faced the catastrophic damage of a no-deal Brexit than become an independent nation. But of course, we know that's nonsense, because as we look across Europe, we see examples of small independent nations thriving and taking a seat at the top table alongside their larger neighbours. And nowhere do we see better the contrast between what Scotland is and what Scotland could be than when we look at the position of Ireland. A small, economically successful nation on the fringes of Western Europe that takes its seat at the top table in Europe and that dictates the EU's negotiating strategy while Scotland is ignored on the sidelines. But you know, the great thing, friends, is that Scotland hasn't been completely powerless in the struggle against Brexit. There have been some victories against the British government, and I've been very proud to be part of them. But those victories came by working with others. So when I worked with Andy Whiteman and went all the way to the Court of Justice to get the ruling that Article 50 could be unilaterally revoked, that was a defeat for the British government. And you know, we had to fight them the whole way, and many commentators ignored or belittled our efforts, but we won through. We won at the end of the day. And equally, with the challenge to Boris Johnson's prorogation, that wasn't just my case. There were other SNP MPs, Labour MPs, Lib Dem and independent MPs who all joined together, but the SNP provided the leadership. And when we started that case to try and have the prorogation declared unlawful, legal commentators north and south of the border said that we would lose, and media commentators were sceptical or just ignored us. And then when we lost at the first hurdle, they poured scorn on us. Then when we won before Scotland's Supreme Court, they belittled Scotland's Supreme Court and said surely that would be overturned in London. But we persevered and we won 11-0 in the United Kingdom Supreme Court. So we won against all the might of the British government, such as it is these days, against all the odds, because we had conviction and self-belief. We knew that in an independent Scotland, with a written constitution, we would have a proper set of fair rules, not a ragtag of conventions and so-called gentlemanly agreements. And we kept going, we kept fighting, and we righted a wrong. And that has been news across the world, that Scottish politicians led the legal fight which forced the British Parliament to go back to work. And by God, do people across Europe now understand why Scotland wants to be an independent nation? So, my message to you today is that independence is coming soon. In the current fog of British politics, it's hard just to see when and where the opportunity will arise, but it will arise. and we have to be ready for it. So my question to you today is, are you ready? I don't think they can hear you at the BBC. Are you ready? I don't think they can hear you at Westminster. Are you ready? Well, my friends, you look pretty ready to me. So my message to you, to coin a famous phrase from another Liberal Democrat, is go back to your constituencies and prepare for independence.
George.
To the task in hand, the horrible B word. Now, for the last 2 years of the last 3 years, people were just bored rigid with Brexit. If it came on the telly, they would, oh, when it comes on the telly, I just turn it off. And then we wonder why people don't know what it's going to mean. And the problem is, both running up to the referendum itself and since, people think that Europe's all about trade and business. And they think Brexit's all about trade and business. It'll not affect me. Even people who own a business go, well, it's not an import-export business. I'm a hairdresser, it won't affect me. If we're outside the European Chemicals Agency, it affects the things that are in your hairspray and your supplies for your hairdressing company. It affects everybody. And the one that, to me, of course, as a doctor, is most important, is the impact on health. Because that affects every single one of us. And it has taken me literally the last 3 years to get a lot of these issues even on the agenda at all at Westminster. Now, part of that is because I don't think they've thought about some of them. They don't care about a lot of them. There's a ghost in there. But it's important that people understand what it means. And it's important we get as many people to understand before they're voting on Thursday what it means. Because it will impact on the vote that they might make and the signal that they want to send out that Scotland doesn't want Brexit. We never wanted it, we voted against it. Now I'm going to run through, and you've got these leaflets on your table, so take them away. It'll be a prompt for you if you're discussing this with somebody else, or even kind of give one to somebody that you think it might be helpful for. And kicking off is thinking about, when I used these topics before the referendum, my articles were positive, my speeches were positive. Please be aware of all the great stuff we're getting from Europe, don't throw it away. Now I know we were told to be positive, but I'm struggling, because at the moment we're in the position where these things are going to be thrown away, and it is important that we recognise what we might lose. Now number one is workforce. Workforce is the biggest single challenge for all 4 UK health services. England's got 41,000 nursing vacancies and 100,000 vacancies overall. We are struggling to fill all our nursing posts and medical posts, and yet their nursing vacancy rate is more than twice ours. So anyone here who's a nurse or works in the NHS, you know how pressured you are. Imagine how your colleagues in England are feeling. And European nationals make up 5% or more of our workforce, including my German husband, who's been a GP in NHS Scotland for over 30 years. And 3 years on, we're only beginning to start to see what Brexit's going to mean for Europeans. And the problem is we've already lost some of them. People who were here who just couldn't take the insecurity anymore. Certainly people in England I mean, I've been at events in Westminster where people have talked about, European citizens have talked about their kids being bullied, about being spat at in the street if they use their own language. Now, I would hope there's not been that kind of behaviour in Scotland, but people feel insecure and they're worried. And they look at Windrush and how people from the Caribbean were treated. The government of the day actually went and said, please come, we need people. And look at how they've been treated. So there's a lot of anxiety. And what we've certainly seen is it's stopping people coming here. There's been a 90% drop in European nurses coming to work in the UK. 90% drop. That means, in essence, that's dried up altogether. And the thing is, while in the referendum they said, oh, you know, it's Europeans that are stopping you seeing a doctor, this is why the NHS can't cope. I can tell you, without our European colleagues, the NHS won't cope. There's a bigger chance that you were queuing to see a European than that there were Europeans blocking you in the queue. And it is important to remember, healthcare isn't delivered by buildings or machines. It's delivered by people. Doesn't matter what buildings or machines they use, there will always be a person at the centre of that that is looking after you. And the further north and west you go into the Highlands and onto the islands, the proportion of Europeans gets higher, particularly from Central Europe, Holland and Germany, because they don't have mountains that sweep into the sea. They don't have wild islands. They absolutely adore Scotland, and they've made Scotland their home. We want them to stay, but when they're older and they're retired, we want other Europeans to feel that they can come and live here too. And while Theresa May celebrates the end of freedom of movement, to me, freedom of movement was the biggest single benefit that we got as individual citizens. Our right to move around, to settle, to study, to marry, to love, to work, anywhere. My husband's mother was Polish and his father was German, and they weren't allowed to marry when they met in the war. They had a child that was taken from them. His father was lifted by the Gestapo and his mother was a forced labourer. And long before we ended up in this mess, he used to say, I can't believe that in one generation I can marry who I love and live where I like. And in one more generation, we're taking that away from our young people. So make no mistake, freedom of movement isn't something to celebrate the end of. It's actually the biggest personal loss for every one of us. And for Scotland, immigration is existential. Our working age population is falling. We need more people. And we need to find ways of hanging on to the young people we have. If we just gradually depopulate into the Central Belt and just become literally that image we've been sold of ourselves, and we sit here with an economy that doesn't function, without enough workers and taxpayers to support our public services, with our tin cup out to Westminster, then our young people will go on hemorrhaging out of Scotland. And that's not what we want. We want a vibrant, dynamic country that they can actually live in, settle in, and succeed in. Now, the next thing after workforce is things like medicines, radioisotopes. We don't make insulin in the UK. We don't make radioisotopes for things like bone scans. We import them. Now, what woke people up to Brexit last autumn was when the government suddenly started talking about stockpiling, and stockpiling food and medicines. People went, wait a minute. Even Leavers went, wait a minute, I didn't vote for that. Nobody mentioned that. But the problem is, these things are not just a matter of if it's a no deal. There's no question that there will be more delay at borders. The one word you will not find in Theresa May's current withdrawal agreement is the word frictionless, because it won't be frictionless. Now, the common isotope that we use in bone scans is called technetium, comes from a precursor called molybdenum. Now, all radioactive material decays down to not really being radioactive at all. And even the precursor only loses half of its radioactivity in just 66 hours. That's less than 3 days. That means you can't stockpile it. And if it ends up spending 12 hours stuck in the river, and then having a different route to actually get to the hospitals, it's got fewer useful doses when it gets there. All of that adds to cost for the NHS. We export and import a similar amount of drugs. Ones that are made in the UK and exported to Europe, ones made in Europe and imported to here. If we start having to pay, customs charges and paperwork on all of that, which we don't have at the moment, it'll all add to the cost. And if the NHS is spending more money on things like this, that's less money for fixing hips or, providing enough staff. What we're also leaving is the European Medicines Agency. This is a single drug licensing system for the whole of the EU and the EEA. That means when a new drug is discovered, it can go through one process instead of 31 processes, so we get access to it. If you look at countries like Canada and Australia, they get access to new drugs about 6 months or a year later. Because obviously, drug companies don't want to pay out to go through a whole process to access a smaller market of the UK, when they can actually pay a similar amount and access 450 million people. And that's the reason why drugs are launched in Europe at almost the same time as America. And we've benefited from that. So from the laboratory to the patient has been shortened because of the European Medicines Agency. And they also tried to direct research towards areas of rare diseases, particularly in children, congenital abnormalities. These didn't get researched before because they're so rare. It's very hard to get enough patients together to do a trial. But out of a population of 500 million, you can do that. And the European Medicines Agency has pushed that. And that's what people will see. Oh, I can't get the medicine I'm normally on. It's going to be something different. Or I'm having to wait. And that is a real issue for people. So even if there isn't a no deal, there will need to be stockpiles to try and smooth out any delays at the border. And as I say, that will include radioisotopes, which simply can't be stockpiled. The next one is your little European health insurance card, which I hope that anybody with any sense has got. At the moment, that means if you now, in a men's event, I would say if you're off to Munich Beer Festival, if you're on a hen night in Prague, and you fall over off your kind of Jimmy Choos and you break your ankle, the great thing is they treat you as if you came from that country. You get exactly the same healthcare as a local. It allows you, even if you've got a severe chronic condition, to arrange treatment in advance. So someone with kidney failure who's on dialysis, now that means 3 times a week. At the moment, being in the EU, they could go for a week to Italy and have their dialysis on their normal days. I defy anyone in this room to show me a travel insurance affordable by mere mortals that would cover that, because I just don't think that's possible. It also allows for something very specialist for people to plan to have treatment in another European country. And particularly it has allowed our senior citizens who want to retire to the sunshine actually have healthcare and indeed social care as if they were a local. That's amazing. And did we ever hear anybody praise it in advance? No. That's how we got here. For 40 years, Europe has been a great whipping boy, a great target to blame for all the ills of everything. Politicians have been able to say, we would fix this problem, Europe won't let us. And we've never heard a celebration of the benefits that we were actually getting. Number 4 is research. Europe is actually the biggest research network in the world. It's bigger than America and bigger than China. And the UK have actually been the biggest beneficiary. We were sitting at number 1 for getting more funding out than we were putting in. And it isn't just funding. You know, Westminster says, oh, don't worry, we'll replace the funding. But I'm sorry, sitting in a muddy field with a bag of money doesn't help you with research. It's collaboration. It's whole teams that are right across Europe being able to work together on the same problem. And similarly being able to say, I can't get that experiment to work. Okay, I'll be on the Ryanair flight first thing in the morning. To simply be able to move around with no discussion and no issue. And to be able to put your efforts together. Europe has just come up with a new clinical trial system that is going to have a single way of putting forward research ideas, registering them, gathering the data, analysing them, publishing them in a shared fashion. And we're going to be outside. And what you're already seeing is people who have led on research are being asked to step aside if they're from the UK. Oh, if you're the team leader, we might not get the funding. You can join in for now, but we'd like you to no longer be team leader. And that is already driving lead researchers out of the UK and out of Scotland. Because in among this research funding, actually in Scotland, we punch way above our population weight. But we have about a third of people who work in research in universities, and about a quarter of senior staff are Europeans. So some of them are going, well, okay, things are not too bad yet, but it's clear the UK will not be at the leading edge in the future, so I'm off. And we're already hemorrhaging some of the staff. And we're already hemorrhaging people who are from the UK because they're going, well, if this isn't going to be the leading edge place, I'm taking that job in Rome or Paris or Berlin. And that is critical to us, is we have a huge university sector. We have a ridiculous number of universities per head of population. And Scotland, our young people are the most highly educated in Europe. 45% of them have a university degree or a higher national qualification. Scotland's always had a highly educated population, and that has made us attractive for businesses to open here, particularly high-tech businesses, and it has made us attractive to bring students in and to win research contracts. All of that is being undermined completely against our will. And the last big thing is public health and health and safety. It's often been pressure from Europe that has pushed the UK to clean up our beaches, clean up our water, try to tackle road pollution, and particularly things like health and safety at work. You know, what do you hear? You hear health and safety gone mad. Well, I can tell you, when I worked as a young surgeon, having people in with chemical burns, thermal burns, hand injuries, arm injuries from work was just 10 a penny. Happened all the time. So when these Conservatives who want Brexit because they think they can make a lot of money out of it, talk about red tape and oh, let us get rid of red tape, remember, one man's regulation is someone else's life and limb. And I'm sorry, who's going to keep pressure on a government like we have at the moment if we're not in Europe? Who's going to say it's important that if you're making cars, you're not poisoning the workers at the same time? If you're painting things, you're not giving people bladder cancer at the same time? That you're not dropping bits of equipment on people? I'm really concerned about that, because that's how they will make money out of Brexit, is by cutting away the rights of workers, the protections of workers. And a lot of them, including protections we as women value around maternity rights, parental rights, have come from Europe. And that means that our future as ordinary people is hugely undermined by Brexit. Nigel Farage or Rees-Mogg might make lots of money. You look at times of war, the rich always make money in times of crisis. But ordinary people don't. The top 10% in the UK are 3 times richer now since the banking crash. Where's everybody else? We're definitely not 3 times richer. And to be honest, that's a lot of what Brexit appears to be about, because Europe is trying to lay rules about tax avoidance, about moving money around, about trying to have structures within the murky financial world that stop companies or individuals playing with their money to not pay their fair share. And obviously that threatens a lot of very powerful people. Now, for me, it's not just the direct impacts of Brexit. It's the fact that Brexit's also being used to undermine our Parliament and to hollow it out. They won't shut it, they wouldn't dare shut it, but they will eviscerate it. They are already setting in train things that pull everything back to Westminster. The power grab, now lots of people don't know what it particularly means, but it's 24 areas of policy that have been devolved for 20 years, where now the ultimate control will be Westminster, not Hollywood. And they say, oh, but you didn't have that power sat at Europe. Yes, but the EU is all about creating a level playing field across Europe. It's very legalistic, it's a bit boring, it's in black and white, it's in all the languages, but it doesn't leave you any wiggle room. But it is about establishing a level playing field. And I'm sorry, that's not what the UK is about at all. What the Scottish Government demanded during the Withdrawal Act was that any new UK frameworks should be agreed. Westminster wouldn't accept that and said, no, they had the right to impose. And that's what they had. That was the night when, there was a 19-minute debate, all of it used by the minister, no Scottish MP of any party got to speak, and then they voted it through. And you have to remember that in these frameworks being set up, when the four countries are debating or negotiating, the UK government will be negotiating on behalf of England, because there isn't a separate English government. But at any point, because they have taken the right to impose, they can just go, enough already. We're also the UK government, and this is how it's going to be. So we see in farming, just as an example, what they're proposing is that there won't be direct subsidies to farmers. Now, for our hill farmers in rural areas, that's going to make life really difficult, particularly if they're outside the Common Agricultural Policy and there are significant tariffs on their produce. Think of the threat that would be to our rural economy. Now, they can do that because England only has 17% less favoured land. That means mountain and heather and all the kind of wild places. In Scotland, we've got 85%. Wales, 81%. Northern Ireland, 72%. So the three devolved nations are a complete mirror image in need and structure from England. But what we're going to have is an agricultural bill that suits England. And money will only be given for what's classed as public good. And unfortunately, and rather weirdly, food production will not be classed as public good. It will be doing environmental things, will be classed as public good, but not actually keeping food at a price that we can afford. And that's just an example of it. I know it doesn't relate to health, but this is what we are seeing going forward. And we're seeing it with the immigration bill, where they're talking about setting a threshold of £30,000 a year to come in. Now, the average salary in Scotland is £26,000 a year. And 3/4 of all European citizens who are here now wouldn't qualify under the new scheme. Junior doctors don't earn 30,000, nurses don't earn 30,000, teachers don't, laboratory technicians don't, young graduates don't. So that's going to make it very difficult to be attracting people into Scotland. And what we discovered when the replacement for freedom of movement was going through is that they plan a 3-year visa. And they say that will allow people to work or study, and isn't that great? Now, I was on the committee, and I said, but that's no use to Scotland. Our degrees are honours degrees, and they're 4 years. You'll need to change that. Why don't you just make it the course? Medical degrees are 5 years. Some engineering degrees are 5 years. Well, we discovered in education questions recently, no, they haven't changed it. So when one of my colleagues asked the education minister, what's your solution to this? Because people are not going to come and study at Scottish universities. Oh, well, when they get to 3 years, they'll have to apply for a new visa. So European students are going to be charged thousands of pounds to come here and study, on the risk that 3 years into their course, when they're in the middle of doing their dissertation for their honours, they're going to start fighting with the hostile Home Office. I don't think so. So that completely undermines the Scottish university sector. And they are utterly unwilling to reconsider it. And this is the problem. This is not being done in agreement with the devolved governments. Poor Northern Ireland doesn't even have a devolved government at the moment. It is simply being, this is what we're going to do, like it or not. And that is a real threat for us. What we're also seeing is talk about the replacements for some of the European funds instead of them being devolved to Holyrood, as would be the norm, that they're going to try and run them out of Westminster, because that gives them the direct power over local government. So there's a lot of these things where power is being taken back, and our Parliament is going to be weakened. Now, I know lots of people don't support independence, but the vast majority support devolution. The vast majority of people know that our health system is different from the one in England because we have our Parliament, and that it is providing us with quite a lot of benefits that don't exist in the other three nations. Now, there are people who don't know that, and some of our job is to try and make sure people do know it. But, you know, from the baby box to free early learning and childcare, to free prescriptions, free tuition for our students, free personal care for our elderly. We're the only nation in the UK that provides free personal care. And all of that is because we have our own Parliament that prioritises health in all policies rather than our position on the world stage. But if that is hollowed out, these things become under threat. And as was mentioned earlier, we never went down the route of turning NHS Scotland into a market the way they've done in England. We didn't set out to privatise and have Virgin Care running big tracts of community hospitals and general practice, etc. And what I've seen from the people I meet, because of course I'm the health spokesperson at Westminster, is the sheer fragmentation. Before you get into how much money is wasted in England on all the bidding and tendering and all the administration, is people can't cooperate because they're competing. That doesn't make sense in healthcare. You actually want to work together so that the patient's path is as smooth as you can make it. And we see the disadvantages of that. So part of the Health and Social Care Act, Section 75, pushed GP commissioners to put all contracts that could be put out to tender had to be put out to tender. And we see how that law is used. In Surrey, 6 commissioning groups, they didn't break a contract, but at the end of the contract they thought, you know what, let's bring this back into the NHS. This hasn't worked very well. Of course, Virgin, their modus operandi, if they don't win a new franchise on the West Coast Rail, or any other new contract, is they sue you. So they sued these commissioning groups, and because it's there in law for England that these things have to be put out to tender, they were able to take that forward. Now the commissioning groups gave up. They didn't go to court because of the cost, and we know that they have settled for at least $2 million. It's all hidden behind confidentiality. But one of the commissioning groups accidentally published that they were paying $360,000. So if you multiply that by 6, it's at least $2 million, although they were one of the smaller groups. That's £2 million not being spent on patient care. And it's all of these things that are leaching money out of NHS England. And as I say, undermining the actual structure of cooperation. In Scotland, when we got our Parliament, almost immediately we turned on our heel because we had trusts. We had the various trusts were meant to be competing with each other. Because although NHS Scotland has always been a separate entity, of course our policy was coming from Westminster until 1999. But straight away we turned on our heel, we got rid of hospital trusts, we then got rid of primary care trusts, and we're now doing a much harder job of trying to integrate health and social care. We've been able to do that because we have our own Parliament. And it is critical that we defend that Parliament going forward. And to me, it's only independence that's actually going to allow the people of Scotland to defend their Parliament, to choose our own future, whether it's in the EU or the EEA or whatever else. This isn't about leaving anything. You know, we're not laying charges along the Solway Fault and sailing off into the Atlantic. Wouldn't mind if we went a bit closer to the net, but we're not planning that. So when people talk about don't leave, we're going to be exactly where we've always been. We'll be here. You'll be welcome to come on your holidays. It's about self-determination. It's about being in charge of your own decisions. And what Brexit has shown us, no matter what the final outcome is, even if it doesn't happen, What it's shown us is that we do not matter one tuppenny toss to Westminster. Our voices mean nothing. And I can tell you, after 4 years sitting on a green bench, they do not care. They don't care what we say, they don't care what we do, they don't care how you vote, they don't care how I vote. And that is what this is about, and it's actually the only thing it's about. But what it gives us is it starts to give us the powers we don't have now to really aspire to what we often talk about, a fairer, healthier Scotland. Poverty is the biggest single driver of ill health. I'm on a cross-party group about health in all policies, and it's about how the breadth of political decision-making affects health and well-being. And we did a report coming up to the Welfare Act of 2016, and we were working with the UK Faculty of Public Health, and there's a fact that I learned that I've never been able to get out of my head, that in the UK, every year, we lose 1,400 children under the age of 15 as a direct result of poverty. That's premature birth, that's low birth weight, that's fetal alcohol syndrome, that's house fires, that's road accidents, that's suicide, that's drug, that's alcohol. All of those things are associated with growing up in poverty and deprivation. And I'm sorry, the main levers that drive poverty are the decisions made in Westminster. And there's only 59 Scottish MPs in total. You know, when Labour decided to abstain on the second reading of the welfare bill, we can't make that go in a different direction. We won't be ever the government of the UK. Everything is driven by what is chosen in England and predominantly what suits the southeast of England. And that's what we would have with independence. And that's what we don't have now. Now, 1 in 5 Scots are living in poverty. And what's worse is 1 in 4 children in Scotland are growing up in poverty. But the surprising thing is that that's actually the best rate of the 4 nations of the UK. So we're at 24% of children in poverty. England's at 30%. Now that's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace. And it's getting worse. There's actually 500,000 extra children growing up in poverty since 2015. So it's getting a lot worse. Not because of the banking crash in 2008. Child poverty started to climb after the first welfare changes, and then again after the second welfare changes. And it's even worse. If your mum is a lone parent who happens to also be disabled, and you've got 3 kids in the family, the double, triple whammy that they took is enormous. You're talking about people who've lost 10-20% of their income due to these changes. And there's a terrible narrative that happens in Westminster, like it's an achievement to be rich. Even if you inherited it, which a lot of them have done, it's not an achievement to be rich. When you work back, you will still find that some part of that journey, for 99% of rich people, they had an advantage over everybody else. Won't always mean they inherited it, but there will be some point where they had an advantage that nobody else had. You know, including Mr. Trump and all the money his dad gave him, which he lost. Being rich is not a virtue. Being good and decent is a virtue. And the way they look down on people who are in poverty, as if it's a failure. You'll have seen that figure before, that 2/3 of children in poverty have a working parent. That's now 70%. So this mantra that they use of, well, if you were just willing to work, work will solve poverty. It isn't solving poverty because of 0 hours contracts, low pay, insecure work. We now have poverty employment and people cannot get out of that. And one of the things that we could do if we were independent is we could set the real living wage as the minimum wage, not the pretending living wage that the Conservatives have set. We invest in business startup. We invest in skills development. But you see, if a company starts to flourish, where does their corporation tax end up? Treasury. If they're employing people, who is it saves on unemployment benefit? The DWP. Doesn't come back to the Scottish Government. We get 29% of tax we've got control over. People are bitching because the Scottish Government did not take on the assignation of VAT. VAT was not being devolved. It was simply that they were going to say, we think this is the amount of VAT that was paid in Scotland, and you can have that. But in 2 years, they've not been able to come up with a formula for how you would work that out. If you actually had power over VAT, you would say things like, see if you're going to do work in your house that makes you more energy efficient, let's give you zero VAT. Let's get VAT off tampons. Let's change what we charge VAT on. Let's change what we charge corporation tax on. If you are a really good company, training and treating your staff well, we'll give you one rate. See if you're an abusive employer, treating people like human robots. Well, I'm sorry, you're paying full whack. We don't have these levers, and we don't have the economic half of the circle to create a virtuous circle. If we invest in people and businesses and local economies, there has to be a return to the Scottish Government so they can do it again, or else the money's just leaching out. At the moment, they're spending £125 million just mitigating cuts that have come from Westminster. So trying to pay the bedroom tax for people. Again, we're the only nation in the UK that is doing that. They've set up a Scottish Welfare Fund for people who are in crisis. That £125 million shouldn't be spent mitigating decisions made at Westminster. That could be in our schools, our hospitals, our community halls, our local government. But it's not. We're having to try and unpick things. My view would be surely Scotland can aspire to more than just patching up austerity that comes from Westminster. So we need to be having a choice. We need to have the possibility of self-determination. And we need to be able to choose our own path. Now, the Tories, Labour and Lib Dems, they don't want us to have a choice, and they categorically don't want us to have a voice. But we need to have that. So those of you, whether it's within Women for Indy, whether you're in a party, whether you're in a yes group, it doesn't matter. We need to be having conversations with people. And they need to be respectful. We should recognise there are people who believe in the union in the same way we believe in independence. And if you recognise that you're not going to change somebody, stop banging your head on a brick wall, because you're not going to change them. And for goodness sake, if you're on social media, don't get into some rammy with somebody. If someone puts up something that's incorrect, and you have a source, fine, share it back and say, actually, I think you'll find this is correct, here's the link to whatever. But do not get into an argument, and do not get into a slanging match. You're not going to change that person. That's clear from their tweet or their Facebook post. But there will be other people who voted no in 2014 who think that's how you talk to them. Because they think that's how you talk to no voters. You yes, yeah, you, all of these kind of negative language, it's not going to convert anybody. Whose mind did you change by banging them over the head with a stick? You want to reach out. You want to actually make it clear, whether it's Women for Independence or any other group. If you have a question, come and ask us. Don't be embarrassed to ask us. We'll try and answer it. We'll try and even give you evidence for it, so that you can think about it and make your decision. We need to be welcoming. And we also need to realise there's lots of reasons people voted no. And it's not all because they sleep in red, white and blue jammies and have, kind of royal memorial teacups and things. People were allowed to. European citizens were told, Scotland will be thrown out of Europe, it will never get back in, and you'll be deported. The vast majority of European citizens voted no. The vast majority now would vote yes. Older people were told, often by politicians knocking their door and saying, if it's a yes on Thursday, there'll be no pension next week. And that was clearly and blatantly a lie. But let's look at that pension. It is 29% of average earnings. It is the lowest in all the OECD countries. The worst. Ask WASPy women. Is that a WASPy woman over there? How they feel about the fact they had 6 years of their pension taken away. So all that, oh, what an amazing pension. Isn't it great? Don't risk it. Except, like my aunts that live in Canada, they still get a pension in proportion to what they paid in. So we had all of these lies that were told to people. And we also had people who just weren't sure. And that's our fault. We didn't convince them enough. And they saw the status quo as a big, smooth motorway with bright lights and nice and easy. I'm not sure, so we're just going to vote for the status quo. Where we are now, there isn't a status quo. It's a fork in the road. And our choice is between the upheaval and chaos and isolationism of Brexit or the upheaval of independence. And there's no question, it will be a big change. But that's the choice that people will have to make. And if we choose to just stay in isolationist, anti-foreigner UK, we'll be in the boot of Theresa May's car. And by the end of the year, we could be in the boot of Boris Johnson's car. But if we choose independence, we're in the driving seat. And it's our choice where we go, what we do. As I say, there's no independence fairy. It won't drop out of the sky. Everyone will have to get up off their bahookies, roll up their sleeves, and get to work. The difference is, just like Women for Indy, we'll not be sitting there going, oh, we can't, and could you please give us? We'll be going, we can. It'll be hard work, but we can make it happen. And we would have the honour to be the generation that actually started to build the better Scotland that we all want to live in. Thank you very much.
Professor of Media Politics at the University of the West of Scotland. Currently my research has been into the media coverage of the Scottish referendum debate, which is about power and the relationship between power and media. I started and I did a year-long study, quite intensive, the mainstream news every night for a whole year. I recorded everything, I transcribed anything I thought relevant to the issues of independence and the referendum. And at the end of that, in February of this year, and I published it, and the BBC instantly complained about it. It went viral on the web. From Newsnet Scotland, we published it, and they had 10,000 hits a day on it, which was massive attention for an academic to get. But the mainstream media, who I had copied it to, the mainstream media, mainstream newspapers, television programmes, radio, ignored it. And in particular, the BBC didn't ignore it, but although they wouldn't report on it, they almost denied its existence, but they wrote and complained about it nevertheless. And they wrote to my principal as well. They copied him in, and they suggested that I had cast the university and the BBC into corporate disrepute. I did wonder about the narrowness of corporate disrepute, no mention of moral disrepute there. So that went to my principal. Luckily, my principal is a supporter of academic freedom and backed me up, as did other people in the school I work in. And I responded to the BBC, I countered all their arguments, I thought, and then they backed off, and since then they've gone entirely quiet about that.
So what puzzles me is, given that potential to have a critique and to have a debate, why didn't the BBC report it? Why didn't the Guardian report it, or the Herald, or why didn't anybody report it, and then find a professor who disagrees with me and call me in and have me debate it with them? Why did they just suppress it?
You could have argued they were trying to endanger my employment by doing so, because they had never done that with any other research. But the fact that it had cast doubt on their impartiality was clearly something they couldn't tolerate. The headline finding was an imbalance, a tendency for the coverage to report more on bad news for independence, worries about the economy, about NATO, about the EU and so on.
Plans to halt EU expansion over the next 5 years, announced by the new president of the European Commission, have dealt a blow to an independent Scotland's membership.
There was a tendency for them to be, those stories to be reported more than positive comments, which were often defensive comments made by SNP politicians. Now, the ratio was only about 3 to 2, and I was quite surprised, as were many commentators, that it wasn't more so. And so what it showed was actually quite a subtle imbalance, not really that dramatic. But what was more important, I thought, was sequence.
Let's get more now on that report that's come out today from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and it warns that an independent Scotland would need to cut spending or increase taxes for its long-term finances to be sustainable.
There was a tendency to start with bad news, and as we all know, people pay attention to what starts. And the person who then responds is put on the defensive.
What do you make of this report? Because John Swinney, Scotland's finance minister, is saying that actually the whole point is that if there were an independent Scotland, there'd be an independent Scottish government making the right decisions on the economy.
Well, he would say that. So that negative news about Scotland's future after independence came first, and commonly a defensive comment came second. And the defensive comment is always weakened by coming second.
Scotland, according to the IFS report today, and they're independent of either of the protagonists here, are saying that the problem we would face is that there is a gap between what we'd have to spend and what we're getting back in.
Bad news has been shown to be effective, and bad news about the economy has been shown to be effective. So I think we can say that when the BBC is reporting negative news about Scotland's economic future, that may be having an effect. It would be difficult to prove, but it may be having an effect. I think that's something to worry about genuinely. I think the voters are actually quite resilient, maybe entrenched. I think it's very difficult to change a no voter from their opinion or a yes voter. Now, I know they're undecided, so that's maybe the area we concern ourselves with. What's I think more effective is the subtle repetition. The repetition of bad news about the economy at more than one point in the programme. In the headline, in the main text, then at the end, and then repeated again several times throughout the day. I think that subtle repetition of negative information, especially if it's about the economy, must have some kind of effect. Difficult to prove, and its subtlety, of course, is one of the reasons that it continues, that people are not always aware of it.
Now, it's a significant blow to Scotland's Yes campaign. The Office for Budget Responsibility, the government's official independent forecaster, has revised down its expectations of the likely long-term revenues from North Sea oil. And not just marginally, by a quarter.
I I think the other major form of bias for me was the use of sources. This is the crucial journalistic choice, is what sources do you use. And there is a tendency increasingly, partly because journalists are so busy, there are fewer of them but more outlets, is a tendency to rely on establishment sources.
Look, this is an independent report. The IFS is a very respected institution.
Independence could leave Scotland facing starker economic choices than the rest of Britain in the long term, according to a leading think tank. A study for the Institute for Fiscal Studies found the decline in oil revenue would force Holyrood to decide whether to cut spending or raise tax.
And there was a tendency to take, by Reporting Scotland in particular, to take reports from the Treasury, from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, from the Office for Budget Responsibility, as if they were impartial. All three of these bodies are politicised, thoroughly politicised, and strongly identify with the unionist position. So that, to my mind, was quite a worrying form of bias. And there were far more of those negative official sources than positive ones. My personal view of the issue that most people should concern themselves with, especially the undecided, but also all of the others, is that when the BBC or ITV present an expert, sometimes a professor, sometimes someone like me, so I'm going to say here you can't trust professors, I think, but commonly professors from universities and people from think tanks.
Once North Sea tax revenues start to dwindle and the additional costs of things like long-term care funding come into play, then Scotland will have a bigger fiscal transition to make than the rest of the UK.
These people are presented as if their intelligence makes them somehow above the dirt of the debate, that somehow they can be trusted. It's not true. We're all the same. Politicians, professors, chairmen of think tanks are all ideologically positioned. They're all coming from somewhere. I've admitted beforehand at the Scottish Parliament I'm coming from somewhere. I'm coming from a sort of left of centre position, and I see Scottish independence as leading to, hopefully, a more social democratic society. I admit to that. There's no point in denying where you come from. But a lot of the experts on television will be presented as if they're not coming from somewhere, as if they're somehow parachuted straight in from a pure space where their argument is entirely reasonable. That's never the case. You can't trust anybody. And if they will reveal their politics, you might be able to trust them more, because then you'll be able to say, I know where that argument is coming from. You can weigh it up honestly.
Damaging headlines for the First Minister. Alex Salmond's credibility is being called into question by opponents. They accuse him of misleading the public about whether an independent Scotland would remain in the EU.
There was a tendency to constantly refer to Yes campaign ideas as being the ideas of just Alex Salmond. They would say Alex Salmond wants this, Alex Salmond wants this, and so on. And I saw that as a process of demonising.
Lots of people think the SNP leader Alex Salmond has a pretty big head, even if the 5-2 diet means the body's getting a bit smaller.
Media who are part of the establishment will characterise opposition leaders as foolish in some way. They'll find a way to personalise the general argument and make it the argument of a single person, and thus undermine it. I thought that was a major form of bias.
Tonight, Alex Salmond under pressure over independence.
Have you sought advice from your own Scottish law officers in this matter?
We have, yes, in terms of the debate, and obviously...
And what do they say?
The First Minister denies opposition claims he lied in that BBC interview about legal advice over EU membership.
The business of media effects is often coloured by people thinking about the Soviet Union, where propaganda was monolithic, where the state view was hammered into the audience. Now, it was totally ineffective. Researchers now have been able to demonstrate that heavy propaganda is worse than no propaganda at all. Heavy propaganda, people start to realise, people start to recognise that everything they're receiving is contrary to what the word pravda means. It's not truth, it's complete lies. It's the lies of the elites in those countries. Now, people in totalitarian states like the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, knew they were being lied to. In the West, in the democratic West, and I maybe should put inverted commas around the word democratic, but in the so-called democratic West, people often think they can trust the media. The media present themselves as sometimes independent, present themselves as free, they present themselves as democratic in lots of ways. But that's a message which is also a lie. The media is largely in the pockets of powerful people. We know that from case studies, we know that from examples like Rupert Murdoch or Conrad Black, we know that from national broadcasters, that they have to satisfy establishment positions. Now, a year or so ago, I had expected a more fair, a more balanced approach by the BBC. I think I naively forgot it is the British Broadcasting Corporation. It is a British institution within a nation state which is changing. Inevitably with evolution it's changing and moving away from the BBC. And the BBC is subject to tremendous complaint these days, although they won't actually tell you what those complaints are. When I was interviewed by the Education Committee at Holyrood, the BBC representatives were asked to say how many complaints they'd had about their coverage of the referendum, and they said they weren't counting them. And basically the reason you don't count complaints, I think, is because you've lost the will to count them, because there are too many to possibly consider. So I think the BBC remains important. I think it's damaged, but probably not that much. It's the most important voice in Scotland.
Ladies and gentlemen, just to let you know, we are totally winging it here. This is just a movement. We've all just come together today just for this. I wasn't supposed to be organising this. Where is Moira?
Behind you again.
Is she behind me? Let's have a couple of words from Moira.
I don't know what to say. You've all done amazing. We're here and we're strong for Scotland. Let's bring home that yes! And who's staying behind to help me with a ladder pick? I'm done.
I think it's the power of social media, isn't it? The power of social media. Forget your BBC, it's a total joke, forget it. This gentleman here, he's got a company called Independence Live. This is getting live streamed around the world without these videos. If anybody wants to get on Twitter, if you want to tweet Independence Live, let's get the message out there. You can make it happen. You can make it happen. Forget the mainstream media, they're an absolute joke. Ladies and gentlemen, Independence Live, we can make this happen. We can make this happen. Let's have the Caledonian cowboy on the pipes. You know the words, join in.
Well, we see the light
Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, please, for our paper. And up next is Mark McNaught from Newsnet.
Hello, this is my first time. I've come to Scotland from time to time. Normally I'm based in France. Oh, excuse me. Okay, is that better? Yeah. Good, okay, thank you. Normally I live in France, but when I heard that the Scotland was planning its referendum, I got extremely excited because you all are doing what we Americans did over 230 years ago. And you hear a lot about all this crap you hear on TV about, oh, Obama said, oh, it's better to, we want Scotland to remain united. And there's an incredible amount of ignorance. The Scottish referendum is very badly covered pretty much everywhere. In France, I see very little. In the United States, I see very little, and I follow all this stuff closely. And so the idea is whether you're supported or whether people in other countries support you. But I can assure you, I used to live in Texas, and if you went to a Texan and say, all right, imagine you're in a political situation where your oil money is going to another state. Imagine that you can't take decisions in your own government, and that you are controlled much more by Westminster than we are by the Texas government is by for example, the federal government. And you're in a situation where you get governments that you simply don't elect. They would understand completely. And if you read through the Declaration of Independence, it's true that there is not a military occupation of Scotland, but so many of the same vindications that you see in the Declaration of Independence are exactly the same things that you're reclaiming now. No constitutional arbitrary rule, no taxation without representation. All of these things are such a common thread throughout all of the different countries that have sought independence from the British Empire, and of which you are will be one of the last. So I just want to say that, again, although there is a profound amount of ignorance about the Scottish referendum in other countries, especially in the United States, you can be sure that if you explained your situation clearly to almost any American,